third and final day. You've survived. The 4 other people who were here on Tuesday, they've not. No, I'm just kidding. Thanks for coming early. It's kind of interesting teaching from 8 to 9. First off, proves that some people actually can get here at 8 o'clock, which is not everyone. And it's kind of fun for me because I feel like I've accomplished something and it's only 9 o'clock. And I'm like, the rest of the day I'm just going to chill. Today, of course, we got demo night, demo competition. Who's tonight? Oh, wow, surprising crossover that 4 of the top 9 demos would also be for the people who made it here. All right, so look forward to that. If whether you're demoing or not, you should come down. It's gonna be at the same. Let's kind of wrap these things up. So I want to return to some of what we're talking about yesterday with actual interviewing. And when we drew that progression from phone screen through technical to offer, at the phone screen, there's a lot you can control, right? And there are some kind of base things that you need to control, aka if you don't control, you're shooting yourself in the foot. Some of those things are getting as high fidelity a conversation as you can. I'm not sure if you have had the mispleasure of using a free conference call line where all the talking is made by about a second. And so everybody's like, no, you go. No, you go. No, you go. It's just fuck, just fine. I'll send you an email. It's so annoying. Those kinds of systems are awful. Ways are by having shitty internet connections, shitty phone connections, and so forth. No one sets out to be I would a Wi-Fi signal for this phone call, but what they do is get ready 90 seconds before a call is supposed to start and then be oh, it's not working that great in this corner of my apartment or whatever it is. Oh well, gotta go with it. So I would recommend that if you have a phone or online interview, try and be early for it in the same way that you might for in person, and be ready for things to go wrong. If you have the possibility, if it is a internet-based thing, if you have the possibility of using an Ethernet cable, that's gonna give you your highest reliable network performance. I'm happy to say that around here, our Wi-Fi usually works pretty well these days, which if you go back and talk to any alumni about tell me about the Wi-Fi turning, they'll be ugh, have you ever heard of the dinosaur game? Which only 2 of you even snickered, which tells me we've done a good job. Because what happens on Chrome, if you don't have internet connections, you get this dinosaur, you hit spacebar, and then turns into a side scroller, which is pretty sweet. Also works on your phone, just FYI. So have a good connection. It is not acceptable to use the built-in microphone and speakers in your laptop. You need to always use headphones at least for the hearing, ideally headphones with any kind of external mic. The problem with laptop and speakers is you get a conversation where talking can't overlap because of the way noise canceling works at your software that you're using, Google Hangouts or Skype or whatever, it is receiving their talking out of the speaker back into the microphone. It's recognizing it, it's cutting it off, anything you're saying at the same time. And so you're gonna lead to a lot of oh yeah, okay, now I can hear you. And it's just those little things that sadly enough can turn you, and you don't want to do that. Have a quiet spot. You'd be surprised how much noise can get picked up in the background. If you were oh, I'll sit in the vault and have my headphones, they're gonna hear everyone else's conversation, and you really need a private space. I know probably a lot of these things seem yeah, no shit, but I swear people get nervous and tense, and then they make bad decisions at the last minute, or they're I have this interview in 3 minutes. Is there somewhere I can go? And it's Jesus! A few more than 3 minutes to prepare for this. if there is any way, so I said like to increase the fidelity of the conversation, if there's any way to have a conversation in person, do it. And if that means going somewhere, it means missing something, it means bending the truth back to like, a matter of fact, I was gonna be in Boulder tomorrow morning, be right there. And then you're like, brr, it's not that far, get on the bus or whatever. Then do it, because your greatest appeal as a candidate is like your humanity, if you will, not really your programming. Your programming's like at best okay. And what you need them, what you need them to think, this is an amazing person, their programming's good enough, let's go. And the richer that conversation, the more, if you can do in person, do in person. If you can't do in person, you do like a video. If you can't do video, then you do phone. At that first phase with HR type folks, they're trying to make sure they're not wasting later people's time. So you prepare for that by trying to be like cool, calm, and collected. Another like small mistake I've seen people make or talk to people is they like go super hard on caffeine, like right before they're like, I'm nervous, I'm gonna have this Red Bull, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, now you're sweating and nervous, and that's not a good place to be. If you have an interview in the morning, I would make sure that it's not the first thing you've done that day. You'd be surprised when, like even for me, to be honest, like showing up and like just going and like talking to y'all, it's a little hard to get moving, right? And this is an environment, y'all can't fire me. So I'm not scared right now. If I was scared, if you were in my spot scared, you'd be like, have a conversation with some real people, maybe do something like a little bit of exercise or whatever, even if it's only 15 minutes, just so that like you're in your kind of best mindset, like your body and brain are ready to perform. Eat before, please. HR screening phases, like you're going to do well. We've already done that before you got here. So like, yes, pat yourself on the back, you're somewhere between like normal and pretty cool, okay? If you just chill out a little bit and you set up like these, kind of like hygiene factors for success, then like you'll do just fine at that phase. The ways you can do better than fine are, like we talked about, doing a bit of research ahead of time, having some smart questions to ask. Very pointed questions, which are things like, oh, I read on the blog that you all took this $40 million investment 6 months ago. Like, how's that playing out? What kind of runway does the company have left? Do you see, is the company profitable or on the verge of profitability, or like not even trying to be profitable? And what do you see as the likelihood that the company is around in 5 years? Like, those kinds of things are interesting, valuable. They're actually valuable to you in the decision-making process, right? It's not a matter of just like throwing some body blows at the HR person. It's like you're getting information. You want to understand how well this company fits like your risk profile. And that's one of the biggest differentiators between graduates, is some folks are like, I want to go to a company that's like cool and doing interesting stuff. And it's like, okay, what if it goes out of business and one? And other people are like, oh my God, my life would be so fucked up. And it's like, okay, great. People is your opportunity to figure out how the company fits with like what you're trying to do. So you can take some steps to get better at it. When it comes to a technical interview or interview with technical people, you can't do much to get better at programming for a programming interview. I would recommend like going ahead and doing some little technical exercise in the morning. You don't want it to be your first programming of the day. You also, I was just talking to an alum who was like, yeah, I did this technical after work, and I had been there getting a second job. And they're like, I've been programming for like 9 hours, and I fucked it up. And I was like, yeah, no shit. Like, you had stopped working because your brain was done. And then you were like, never mind, let's go work in a more ambiguous, more nerve-wracking situation. And it didn't go well. So do like a little bit of technical work beforehand. Your ability to become a better programmer for an interview is low. But your ability to demonstrate the habit is always very high. And what you need to understand is that in a technical interview, the things you think they care about are not the things that they actually care about. There is a feeling of like, I'm supposed to be the Wikipedia of programming. I'm supposed to know all the facts and all the functions and all the methods, and no one cares. Like, that's just not the important part of programming. And even if they do care, that part is out of your control. You're not gonna have like flashcards of like 200 functions or methods or whatever that you're drilling right before the interview, right? Like, that's not practical. I don't think. Maybe try it, it could be cool. Probably a waste of time. What you can always do, regardless of your knowledge, is apply, demonstrate, and explain a process. And the thing that makes or breaks a junior developer, and likely all developers, is their process for solving problems, not their knowledge of solving problems. If you go back to the initial days of Turing interview and you think about like those logic problems, almost everyone gets all the answers correct. That's not what it's about. What we're looking for is like, how do you approach the problem? How do you take feedback? How do you integrate feedback and suggestion and to influence the next steps of your process? If we give you a tip, do we have to give it to you again 10 minutes later? Or are you able to apply it the second time? Those kinds of process understandings are what good technical interviews look like. I won't say that it's all technical interviews. There are occasionally places where they like, it's like taking a math test kind of. They like hand you the assignment, they walk out the door, they are like, let me know when you're done, you got an hour. That's kind of a stupid technical interview in my opinion, because it's all about product and not about process. The danger for hiring a junior developer is that they have a shitty process. It's okay to not know everything. It's not okay to have a shitty process, because what happens when you're that person is that you get lost when you're actually doing the work, that you get lost in a feature you're trying to build. You're then kind of ashamed. You don't want to ask questions days or a week or 2 weeks, where it's like you're just digging this trench and filling it back in and not getting anywhere because your process sucks. And that's what a good senior developer or team lead is most worried about. What they want to see is a process that's organized, sensible, and that other people can participate in and step out of. I don't want to feel like the only way you can solve a problem is for me to come and hold your hand. And at the same time, I don't want to hear that like, I'm not welcome, right? Just stop for a minute, I just need to think. People say that pretty, like not that infrequently. And you can say the same thing, just a little bit better than not sounding like a jerk. So if it were me, and I were in your shoes going into a technical interview, thinking about process, I would actually decide what my process is. Like, there are things, platitudes people throw around here like, oh, Turing, I learned how to learn. And I'll sometimes ask people like, tell me about it. How do you learn? And they're like, well, I do stuff. And I'm like, doesn't sound like we really taught you that very well. Or like, oh, process for building software. Yeah, cool. What's step one? Step one, like read the problem. Like, that seems quite obvious. What's step two? Make software. Like, that's not a process, right? So I would consider, now I'm not like mandating, but I would consider figuring out what is the process by which you're successful at solving problems. For me, for instance, I find that I do my best when I have problems that are difficult. I do my best work when I like, number one, move my body. And it's like my brain works better when my blood is moving. And I like to discuss it with other people and say like, here's what I'm thinking. What are you thinking? What do you see going wrong with this? So for me, a step one would be read the problem. Step two would be figure out how I'm gonna know when it's correct, how I'm gonna know when it's done, like what will happen when it's done. Step three would be to draw it, and I would use paper or dry erase board or whatever I can get access to. And the ways I like to draw, there are some, in my opinion, very silly things about, they're called like ERPs or something like that, like technical definition on a whiteboard. It's a waste of time. If a common technical challenge is something like take in this text and process it in this way and generate some output. One of the challenges that we've seen pop up once or twice is like take this text file and output a list of every character, how many times it appears in the text file. Right. So if I had the way I would draw that is to conceive of it in phases. So I'm going to have a phase that's like reading the text file, and it's going to go to processing, that's like picking apart or gathering the data, and then that's going to flow into an output piece that is like prepping the output and the formatting however I want to do it, right? And then I start to think like, okay, what's is a file name, and what comes out of reading the data from the file is like an array or something of data and of like the raw data. And then I gather it and like organize it by the letter, the word, or organize it by the letter itself. And then what comes out here is like a collection that's like A reference to 12 and B reference to 31 and stuff like that. And then what outputs here is a string that's like A12, B31, like that. I made up a problem and I shouted it out in 2 sentences, and like if you listen while I'm pulling this apart, like you're probably looking at this as like I could build that program, right? Because I'm like communicating the process of like how am I conceiving of the problem. It also gives me an opportunity to ask the person that I'm collaborating with or interviewing with to be like, is this kind of how you see it? Like, what do you see as potential stumbling blocks, or are there parts like you might do differently? And then it might be like, oh, it's your interview, bro, like you figure it out. But more than likely, they'll be like, well, that's how most programmers start sentences. Well, maybe this, you could do this thing over here. Great, fine. Because that's what it looks like to build real software, is to kind of generalize a plan and then discuss it and then start building things. If you, we used to ask a question in the interview, like how do you approach big problems? And we stopped asking it because everyone says the same thing. Well, I like to take a big problem, break it down into small problems and solve those and bring it all together. Like, great. And then you give people problems and they're like, I'm gonna go ahead and just solve this whole problem all at once. And that's the way that software and technical interviews all go wrong, is trying to solve the problem all at once. When you take the time to break things down on paper, on dry erase board or whatever, you've now started to lay out like, here are components, and here's how I could build success and demonstrate success in process, even if I don't get success in the end product. Like, if I only have 45 minutes and I'm trying to do this thing and I'm trying to write tests and write like decently clean code and so forth, I might not finish this in 45 minutes. But I can finish this part in 45 minutes. And if I get that done, then I'm gonna build this part. And if I got those 2 parts, like this part's really trivial, just taking some hash or array or something and printing it out. But when I break things down and explain how they're gonna fit together, I'm demonstrating process that it doesn't matter if I finish the problem or not. When I have a weak process, when I'm approaching solving the whole thing, it's kind of like watching someone like about to hurt themselves, and that's the most painful thing in an interview, is to be like, you're approaching this wrong, but okay, it's your interview. Like, if you ask me, I'm gonna tell you. I'm gonna sit here and like let you do it, and then you start in and you're like, oh yeah, I can solve, I've seen a problem like this, oh I can do this, and then you get 20 minutes in and now the momentum's starting to slow down because there's no like incremental checkpoints of success, and it's like, well, it's not done, and now you start getting in your head, oh my god, there's only 20 minutes left, oh my god, I'm not halfway done, oh my god, they're gonna find out I'm dumb, and then at the end of 40 minutes it's like, yeah, I typed a bunch of things. Congratulations, you can find a different job. I would figure out what is the process that works for you in like 4, 5, 6, 7 steps. And I would write it down and I would practice it as you're doing those 90-minute code katas and so forth, exorcisms and whatnot. And maybe it feels ridiculous to be in your apartment by yourself at 9 a.m. talking about programming. Cool, fine. When it won't feel ridiculous is when you need to do it for real. Because if you can practice it when it feels awkward, then when you need to do it, you'll do it well, right? And it'll make sense to people. You should be able to explain that process and things like, why do you do this? Why do you do that? And you'll have opinions. If you practice it, you'll have, if you practice executing a real defined process, you have opinions about that. And that's part of what people want to see in the human side of a software developer, is like right ways and wrong ways. Like, there aren't right ways to solve this problem and wrong ways to solve this problem. There are some that I might think are shittier. That doesn't mean they're wrong. Like, if you're like, I'll just build it all, I don't even need methods, I'll just write instruction, like, technically possible. I wouldn't do it, right? You can always control your process, you can't always control your knowledge. Knowledge is like hard fought, hard won over a significant amount of time. Process, you can change like instantly if you decide. You could consider, if this is a thing that you're like really practicing, you're probably notebook, right? And just fucking have it on page 1 of the notebook. Like, well, let me tell you about my process. And you're like, step 1 is this, and step 2 is this, or whatever. That's cool. That's a lot better than just being like, first I think we should maybe do this thing. If you have a good process where people believe that they can participate, then they see how on a bigger scale, on a week scale, on a month scale, on a year scale, they can participate in your growth and development of your knowledge and your comfort and your familiarity. I think about it cycling once, and they talked about like your rotations per minute, and how if you train spinning the pedals at like 110, 120 RPM, and you can master that, then eventually you can build up the strength to ride at like a more and more difficult gear at that RPM. And that's kind of how I think about like process and knowledge in programming. Like, if you have a good process, you can always add knowledge to it. If you have a bunch of knowledge and you have a shitty process, it's not that great. Like, when you move to a new language, you're effectively starting over. Right? A person with a good process, when they move to a different stack, a different app, a different language, 85, 90% of what they do still applies. It's just that knowledge that's 10%. The people who are interviewing you on the technical side, one of the things they're scared of is that you're like a one-trick pony, that you know how to type some stuff in JavaScript, or you know how to type some stuff in Rails, which is not a language. But you know how to type code, you don't know how to write programs. And that's the difference, is like typing code is about knowing what words to type to get what result. Software engineering is about process. Questions on process, interview, demonstrating processes? perfectly. No, that means I did a shitty job. Because if you were thinking, you would ask questions. Okay. So we talked a little bit yesterday about negotiating, and I don't think it's worth a whole lot. If you get offered a job, you can turn it down. And sometimes people worry about that. I think it is okay to pursue any job where there's a scenario that you would accept it. And it doesn't mean that, like, if they offered me the job, I'm definitely going to take it, therefore I would interview. You can allow them to sell you on the job. If it's a 0% chance, like this job is in Atlanta and you're 100% locked in on Colorado, don't go through the process. That's like being a jerk. But if there's a 3% chance, cool, go ahead and get that job offer. Turning down job offers is a fucking amazing feeling. Being like, y'all seem cool. It's not quite cool enough. See you. Right? I would say in the past was more common, 3 or 4 job offers and pick one. I would love to see you do that, particularly if you can execute it in such a way where you have them more or less at the same time. It's a little nerve-wracking when you get, it's a lot nerve-wracking when you get an offer and you're like, I think I like this, but what if there's a thing behind it that I love? That's a tricky situation, and I'm happy to like try and help you unpack it if that arrives for you. People have a way of talking themselves out of or avoiding rejection by pretending to be afraid of that situation, right? Like, I'm not sure this is really the company for me, so I'm not gonna apply, or I'm gonna step out of the process or whatever. It's like, but what if they offered you the job? Then it might sound like the company for you, you know? Getting job offers feels really good. I recommend you do it like as soon as possible. If you say no to a job offer, it doesn't have a negative halo effect on friends and other alums and so forth. And in most cases, if you have been like honest, straightforward through the process, it typically makes. And 3 months or 6 months or a year down the road, if you're like, hey, you know, we talked, I applied, it wasn't the right time for me, but I'd love to talk again, they're like, yeah, come on. I tell you, I've done that, as like people have turned down a job at Turing, and I'm like, oh, how dare you? And then 6 months later, I'm like, hey, how about now? 12 months later, I'm like, hey, how about now? And then finally they're like, okay, stop bothering me, I'll do it. Right? When you consider a job offer, I want you to remember that like your number one responsibility is to yourself. And people will sometimes reach out to me and have conversations like, oh, I want to take this job, but the pay for me, but I'm worried about, like, I don't want to hurt the stats. About the stats. And like the only reason I care about like what the statistics say is like what story it tells or like forecast for you as an individual. And if the average salary were to dip down $1,500 over 6 months, like it doesn't feel great, but I'm not like, oh, Julian, how dare you took that low pay job? You know, it's like, we want to see you in a job that you're and growing in, and if that means the pay isn't what you want, but it's like fine for you, like cool, take it. And at the same time, like if you get a job offer and it's not the right thing for you, don't take it. Like you're not responsible for this like network effect or what so-and-so might think about Turing students or whatever. They'll think much worse if you get into a job that you don't like and you suck at it because you don't like it. That sounds really bad. Over time, at least that I know of, I should say, of the 470 alums or whatever it is now, I think we've had 2 ever let go from a job. So when people accept a job, they tend to do a really great like execute it very well, right? That's the thing I'm more concerned about. I'm not concerned about the so-and-so might be mad if you turn down a job offer. It's okay. We talked yesterday about kind of trajectory and my belief that most jobs are pretty good jobs. The times that I would turn down a job offer is when it doesn't fit like my risk profile. That's the number one thing to me, where it's a place like I want to be in a really fast-paced place where we're making a lot of decisions and like throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what happens. I'm not going to accept the job at Allstate. I probably should have never applied there in the first place. No offense, Allstate. And like want a place where you can feel good that you're going to be there for 18 months and paychecks are always going to show up on time and so on and so forth, then like the 5-person startup, no matter what they say or what funding they have right now, not a good plan. Right? Now, hopefully you figured those things out much earlier in the process than like when they make you a job offer. But if it gets to that point and you realize that it's not a fit for your risk profile, that's one of the clearest times to say no. The smart move is to be like, it's not the right fit for me, but I'd like to introduce you to my friend. And then people are like, cool, yeah, we'll talk to him. Great. Y'all are the same to them. You're all just like noobs who know a couple things about programming. Just kidding, you're wonderful individuals. One other thing you should know is in offers, they typically want to know back in a certain period of time. Most places will say what that period is. If they don't say, ask like as soon as you get the offer. You should ask like, I want to some back. Can you tell me how many days do I have that you'd like to know? Sometimes exceptionally short decision windows, like 24 hours, 48 hours. Sometimes, more rarely, it'll be like, oh yeah, whenever, like a couple weeks. That's very unusual, and I would call it almost like a yellow flag of like, you should probably have like a little more urgency about this than that. When somebody says, we need to hear back in 2 days, or it's Friday, we need to hear back by Monday, it's not anything to do with you. It's not because they're trying to like pressure you or anything like that. It's because they have other candidates in the pipeline and you're number one pick, but they're afraid of letting 2 and 3 and 4 go. And they want to get a yes from you before they tell those people, thanks, it's not going to work this time. And what they're afraid of is you take 2 weeks and then you say no, and then the other people also already got jobs and now they start over from scratch. Right? So the timelines on accepting, rejecting an offer are about the other candidates, they're not about you. You can ask for more time if you need it. I would say you probably don't need it. Like 24 hours, 48 hours, you're not going to learn anything in 72 hours that you're not going to figure out in 48 hours. Like, it'll feel nerve-wracking, and call your mama or do whatever you have to do. Just go ahead and make the decision and pull the trigger. We're always happy to like check out offers and give you feedback on them. One thing that I'll tell people is like equity to me is worth $0. Their stories, right? You've maybe heard the story before of like the person who painted the mural in Facebook's first office and then got paid in equity, and then by the time they IPO'd, it was worth like $1 million or whatever. That's not going to be you. The equity that people give to a junior developer is like 0.0000001% of a thing that might someday be worth something. Even for more senior developers, in my opinion, equity is like a mirage. Like 1 out of 5, 1 out of 10 times it's going to be worth something. Most of the golden handcuffs, pain in your ass. And there are a bunch of complications around like taxes and when you pay taxes, and there are things with options, like you could possibly get these options and then you need to have the money to actually buy the options, and if you haven't saved up 25K or whatever, it's not going to work out. Just in my opinion, for like the first couple years of your career, like the first 3, 4, 5 years, unless you're going to be one of the founders of a company, which PS you have no business doing, like you need to go figure out how the industry works and what the fuck you're doing. Unless you're gonna be like C-level, VP level, director of engineering type, your equity will never be worth the trouble that it brings. So if somebody's gonna give it to you, yeah, sure, take it, fine. But assume that it will never be worth $1. Even if you're early-ish in a company, like 15 or something, at maybe your second job, if everything goes well, that equity might be worth 50K to you, or 100K down the road. And not that 50K or 100K isn't awesome, but you're looking at like a year of salary, not like, fuck you, I'm out for the rest of my life. Like it's not gonna happen unless you're like in that kind of founding level. And even then it's crazy, crazy difficult. Boil that down, the equity part, just skip right past it. Like, yeah, neat, okay, cool. I like money. Getting money is a lot better than getting equity. Other things you might see in an offer or you can ask about are things like professional development budgets, equipment budgets, particularly if it's a place where you either are allowed to or encouraged to work at home. Like, do they pay for laptops, and will they pay for part of your internet bill and all that kind of stuff? These are questions that I would come at as like inquisitive, not demands of like, cool, I want to set up like a really good office scene at my house. Like, is there a budget for buying equipment? And often it's the case that people are like, oh yeah, when you start, there's like $3,000, buy whatever you want. And then you're like, wow, cool. It's just computers, it's not that cool. When you get to the point of an offer, if you come back to that idea of like the teeter-totter, time has been invested in you and they expect you to take the offer and they want you to take the offer. So like, although yes, your leverage is overall low in the scenario, it's highest at that point where you actually have an offer. Salary is the hardest thing to move. Everything else tends to be more negotiable. And to you, it might seem like money's money, like they won't give me an extra 3K in salary, but they will give me 3K for buying my new laptop. That's bullshit. And it's like, you have to understand that those things all come out of different budgets and different parts of the kind of like tax portfolio and so forth. And it's more complicated than it seems from the other side. The plus side there is that if there's a place that you really like and they can't pay you what you're looking for, then they might be able to pay you in other ways, where it's like, yeah, it's gonna be this job at 70, I was hoping for 75, but could we write into the contract like a $2,000 a year professional development budget? And then might be like, hell no, we can't do that. Or they're like, oh yeah, sure, we do that anyway, let's put it right in there, right? And those kinds of other ways to get compensation. Also, start dates tend to be flexible. As I said on the first day, like it's really, really awesome and not that uncommon to take a job, tell them you'll start in a month, and then have your 2-3 week vacation, and you can actually like have a light heart and like happy brain and stuff and vacate, instead of being like, I'm at the beach stressing about how my career my whole life and oh my god, everything's falling apart. What companies want in start dates is they want to know that they don't have to worry about it anymore. And they typically don't care about like whether it's 2 weeks from now or 4 weeks from now or whatever. They know you're coming and they believe you and they're locked in. One scenario that has popped up a couple times in the last year, just to put on your radar, is sometimes companies set a start date and then they move it. Where they're like, oh yeah, start in like 3 weeks, and then a week from now they're like, actually, let's make it 5 weeks. This is like big red flag. Generally, it's with consultancies, and it's that they're trying to time the work to the personnel just right. And when they change the expectation, it's a sign that they're not really in control of like the faucet of work. And like, we thought we were gonna have work for you, but actually it's gonna be 2 weeks later. Come then. And what happens like too frequently in those situations is you eventually start, and then 6 months later they're like, actually, we don't have enough work for you. We love you so much. We'll write you a great recommendation. You got to find some other place to work. I'm just kind of like down on consultancies right now in general. Everyone I talk to in the industry is having trouble with sales, and that's like a very dangerous place to be the low person on the totem pole in an organization that doesn't have enough work to do. Offers, contracts. Read your contract, by the way. You think it sounds obvious, many people don't. And I learned the hard way that you write a contract when you're in love and you use it when you're in hate. And you need to read a contract with the eyes of like, when I hate these people and they hate me, how then will I interpret this? It is very much worth the time and money to have someone else read it who's an expert in these things, particularly if they're unusual about it. Like if you're going to be doing some kind of unusual job or some kind of unusual company or unusual payment setup or whatever, it's worth paying a contract lawyer $250, $500 to like spend an hour and do it. And I'll tell you, one of the worst like 10 minutes of my life was paying a very high-priced lawyer to read a contract that I had signed already. And he's going through it, and he's making little. And he's like, flip the page. And he gets done, and he goes, I wish you had called me before you signed this. I'm like, I know. That's why I'm here. Don't make the mistakes I've made, okay? You will anyway, but I'll try and share them with you. Go ahead.
I can't think of what the clause is called, but how concerned or how much should we pay attention to
intellectual
like
property?
Intellectual property, yes.
Yeah.
Assuming it's all work for hire. But
Yeah. So there are a couple things you're interested in. Is like, what does a non-compete, conflict of interest type thing look like? Enforcement of non-competes is state by state. In Massachusetts, the state enforces them like strictly. And in California, they're considered completely unenforceable. This is a hypothesis of why like Silicon Valley was able to germinate more quickly, despite the fact that like Boston has a much higher density of computer scientists and computer engineers and all that stuff. Colorado, for reference, does not enforce non-competes, which I was reading this and I was like, fuck yeah! And then it was like, except managers and partners, and I was like, fuck me! So generally speaking, with things like a non-compete, a company can't afford the image hit of suing its own employee or former employee. When you're like, hey, I'm out, I'm gonna go work for our client, everyone might be pissed. They're not gonna sue you. It's expensive and it just looks terrible, and all the other developers who are still on the team are like, whoa, that was our friend, you're suing them? Fuck you guys, we're out too, right? So it's really like a goodwill thing more than it is like a legal situation. You want to understand what it says. And the problem scenario is when you don't know what it says and then you do something and then you're fighting about it. If you know what it says, you can usually talk about it before you do something, and your likelihood of getting a peaceful resolution is a lot higher. It's true for both non-competes and IP agreements. So in a non-compete, when, say, you are working at a consultancy, and the most common thing is it's in the client's contract that they won't hire employees from the firm. And when you come to your boss and you're like, look, I've been working on this project for 3 months. I'm super fired up about it. I love working with these people, and I've really appreciated my time here, and I super want to go work on this full time. 4 out of 5 times they're gonna be like, oh, we hate to lose you, but like, okay, go to it, have a great life. And the same scenario where you're like, hey, so I know this might be a problem, but I took a job at this company. They're like, you know what, fuck you, man. Conversation. The same is true on intellectual property. You should know what's in there. The chances that you in the next couple of years produce some intellectual property on the side that's worth a whole bunch of money is low. Technically possible, but likely very low. What you want to know is, what does that IP clause say? What you should assume it says, and the way you should interpret it, is that if you ever use work, time, resources such as computers or Wi-Fi, or expertise to build a thing that you think you own, they probably can express some ownership of it, or complete ownership of it. One of the infamous examples was like when Jobs and Wozniak like built the first Mac. Wozniak was like interning, I think, at HP and had an IP clause, and he had to go present it to them and be like, would you like to own this? And they were like, nah, and made Apple. And so like wrong call, HP. The right move is to know what it says, and then if you start working on something that looks like it could possibly go somewhere, you have a preemptive conversation and you follow it up with a written memo that says, you chat with your boss and you're like, hey, I wanted to make my own time tracker, and then I started thinking maybe it'll become a product, and is it like, I just want to let y'all know I'm like working on this in my evenings and weekends, doesn't interfere with work. And I'll be like, that sounds awesome, maybe we'll use it, whatever. And then you write it up in a memo that's like, as we discussed yesterday, like, want to let you know, here's the thing I'm working on, here's when I'm working on it, here's who I'm working on, and I don't believe it's going to interfere with my job, and I don't believe the company has like any interest or say in the product. And we agree to that, and they'll be like, yeah, sure, everything seems great. What you don't want is the later scenario where you're like, hey, this thing I've been building, it's spinning off 10K a month in recurring revenue, and I'm going to have that be my full-time job. And then people are like, wait, what? You built a what? When did you build it? What about that time when you didn't have client work and then you were taking time off? And to be transparent, I've had somewhat the same thing with folks taking other jobs sometimes, and I'm like, wonder when you did those interviews. Bet I was paying you for those hours when you're doing the interviews at that company. That feels real great. Doesn't feel real great, as opposed to if somebody's like, hey, I think I need to find a new job, I'd be like, go interview, go do it, like tell me what kind of schedule you need, right? It's all about the timing of the conversation. Does that make sense?
Does that imply that paid time off, if you do something during that time, they could assert ownership over that, or is that?
I think that's a very ambiguous situation. Depending on like a court's interpretation, you can, for instance, like using your personal laptop, if you company Wi-Fi, like technically you've used company resources to build that product, and like they can exert some ownership. So friends who have what we call like a side hustle, they often carry 2 laptops, and it's like, this is my work thing, this is my personal thing, and I'm making sure they stay totally separate. That's a wise move if you think it could turn into a real thing. Always, always, always just tell people early and upfront when it feels ridiculous. It's like, here's this teeny tiny little thing my mama put, go make your thing. And you just don't want it to be late when it's actually worth something. That's when everybody's like, maybe I should have done something here. Does that make sense? Any other questions on like IP, non-compete type things?
I had another question going back to timing and offers.
Yep.
If you have an offer come in that gives you 3 days, so it's not super urgent, and you're pretty far
I would
along,
still call it pretty urgent. Go ahead.
Yeah. You're another process, but there's no offer there. How do you balance this?
Yeah. I would be happy to be very transparent with both sides. I think it is rare that you create a problem by telling the truth in these kinds of scenarios, which is to say, like, company A who sent the offer, to tell them like, hey, I'm excited about this, but I have another thing going, and I feel like to be fair to you and fair to them, I want to compare these side by side. And I know you asked for 3 days. I'm going to tell them that I need their decision quickly. Can you give me 5 days so that I can give them a chance. Like, I think you're still gonna come out on top, but I just want to make sure that I'm being smart, like comparing apples to apples. 4 out of 5 companies and HR people are gonna be like, yeah, that makes total sense, do it. 1 out of 5 is gonna be like, you would fuck you. Like, never mind, we retract the offer. It's rare, and it's a sign that like you didn't want to work there in the first place. So you're better off, even if it feels short-term painful. Then you come to the second company, company B, and I am in favor of just being very straightforward with them and being like, hey, I'm excited about the conversations we've had so far, working on this code challenge, having this interview come up. I want to let you know that I have another offer in hand. If the salary is good, I'm going to tell them what the salary is. It's to be a entry-level developer and get paid $78,000, and they asked to have a yes or no in 3 days. I know you're not ready to make the decision on me just yet. I've asked them for 5 days, but if you can help me figure out whether you're a viable option in comparison to this in the next 3 days, 4 days, I'd really appreciate it. And the thing they're going to do is be like, someone else thinks you're hireable? We probably also think you're hireable. Like, what do we have to do to get this person an offer, right? My brothers went out, I'm the youngest of 4, and they used to say, like, when you're single, no one wants to talk to you, and when you're in a relationship, everyone wants your number, and it's like that with jobs. Like, once you're validated as being hireable by someone, then everyone is like, you must be okay, like, quick, let's get him. And then it almost starts to become like a competitive thing of like, we just want to win. We don't want you to take someone else's job. Like, we want you to take our job. What's it going to take? I would just be very honest with maybe bending it to like just slightly shorter. Like, if I have 5 days, I might tell them I have 4 days. Company B, that I have 4 days, because what's going to happen, they're rushing, and then it's going to come up to the thing, and they're going to be like, hey, yeah, we want to get you an offer, but we need 1 more day. And then you're like, oh, you're breaking my back. Actually not, but okay, 1 more day. And then you can compare them side by side. It's also okay, I think, in that scenario to give kind of a like temporary turn down, which is on company A, where you're like, hey, I'm really excited about the company and I think this could be a really good fit. I just don't understand enough about the market yet and like my value in the market to say yes right now. So I understand 3 days is the timeline you need. Like, I can't meet that. But if so it's going to be a no for me for now, but in a month, if you're and I would love to like resume the conversation. That's an okay thing to say. They're gonna be a little bit hurt about it, but it's an okay thing to say. So tell company B what constraints they need to know about in order to beat company A, and they'll try and do it. There's some other things about like how to actually be successful in a job once you get it, but who cares about that really? No, I'm just kidding. That's not most top on your mind right now. I'll give you the super quick version, which is that one of the smartest things you can do in your first job is to do exactly what you've been doing already in building a portfolio. The reasons we have a portfolio are not so that we know whether you know what you're doing or not. Shocker, we pay attention and actually know whether you should get promoted or graduate. The portfolio's purpose is for you grapple with the fact that you have like accomplished things and made progress and so forth. You will go through the exact same scenario in the job where 6 months in you'll be, if you don't track anything, you'll be like, oh, I don't even know why they pay me. I'm not worth anything. All I do is Google all day. And instead what you do is you build a portfolio that looks like individual work, collaborative work, professional skills, and feedback. And if you gather that data, when you get into that 6-month check-in and they're like, yeah, let's talk about what you've been doing so far. And you're like, oh, matter of fact, I've been doing this. They're gonna be like, oh, what? You did all this shit? Like, we should give you a raise. And you're like, yes, you should. Let's go. Okay, so do that. I'll tell you more about that some other time. Go get a job. Just give you a raise. And you're like, yes, you should. Let's go. Okay, so do that. I'll tell you more about that some other time. Go get a job.